Well, I want to read a little verse here, and then we're see what God does. Dear friends, this is this is actually John, 1 John 4, verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. When I was 18 years old, I fell into love. I was going to college, Salem, Oregon, up in the northern part of the state, and I go to the first English class. It's my first class, my first day of being in college. Super excited, got my notebook, got all the fresh paper all ready, my backpack, new tennis shoes. Show up, sit down at the table. In that class, they pushed these square tables together. There were 20 of us. We sat around the table. I sit there, I get the notepad open, got the pen ready. The professor begins to teach, and I'm going to learn. I'm in college. I'm going to be smart. And I'm sitting there, taking notes, getting ready. I had an empty chair next to me. About 4 minutes into the class, the back door opens, and in walks the most beautiful young woman I had ever seen in my life. She walks in, and she takes the chair right next to me. She has this long, dark hair, these sort of deep brown eyes, this sweet little bow mouth. And when she comes in and sits down, I am suddenly very disturbed. I can't focus. I no longer care about being a good student. I can feel the energy of this young woman, this beautiful creature sitting next to me. And so instead of taking notes, I'm just kind of staring, trying to think of things clever to say. But, you know, your throat gets tight, you get nervous, and I didn't say anything. I just sat there pretending to be listening to the professor. The class goes on, it ends. I get up, I turn to say something to her when another guy from the class comes over, says, "Hey, Jill," and stands with her, and he puts his arm around her, and they walk out together. His name was Dale. And to this day, I don't like Dale. They walk out of the class. A few weeks later, they're doing a fundraiser, a little sorority group is, and they're selling roses. I see these roses, and I think, this is a sign. They're selling roses for $1 a rose, and you could give them to people on campus. I want to give a flower to somebody, and they're selling flowers. This is perfect. This is a sign. I buy one of the flowers. I go up. I know where Jill's room is. I knock on her door. She comes to the door, and there's Dale standing behind her. And I say, "Oh, I'm just delivering flowers. We're giving it to everybody here in the dorm. I'm the one delivering it to you." Made up this total lie. A few weeks later, I'm watching in our dorm. They're showing Romeo and Juliet. And all of us are sitting down in the dorm in the basement. We're watching on television. And it's that balcony scene. You know, Juliet's up in the balcony. Romeo's hiding. He's talking to her. And now I had found out at that time that Jill was living in a sorority. She had a balcony outside. She was in a corner room. And they had a little balcony. And I'm thinking, what are the chances? Here I am watching Romeo and Juliet. It's a love scene with a balcony. And I'm in love with a girl who has a balcony. This is a sign. I get my guitar, I sneak by the side of the sorority, I go out there. There was bushes, a whole hedgerow of bushes about 4 feet from the building. I kind of wedge myself through the bushes. I go onto the balcony. It's about 11:30 at night by the time the movie gets over. I get my guitar out and I start to sing. I love you truly. This is the only song I know. My grandfather taught it to me, and I'm singing this song. And I sing, and I'm kind of being kind of goofy a little bit, but I'm kind of serious. And I'm singing this song, and sure enough, Jill and the other her two roommates come out onto the balcony. And I'm singing this song, and she's kind of laughing and looking down. I'm thinking, this is perfect. When all of a sudden, a flashlight shines straight into my face. I turn, it's campus security, and they're saying, "Hey, get out from under there." I come out, they take me, they grab my arms, they put the little plastic doohickey around my wrist, pull me off to the side. It turned out there had been some people sneaking around and peeking in the rooms of the sororities. they thought it was me. So I'm hauled out in front of the sorority. All the sorority girls come to the front of the sorority. They're all looking through the window, and I'm humiliated with this thing tied around me, answering these questions. And some of the sorority girls are going, "Is he the guy? Is he the one who was sneaking up?" Because there had been reports of this. And finally, I clear it up. It's not me, but I'm humiliated. Now it's Thanksgiving time. I go back, and I've just totally given up. I stopped going to that class, the class before Thanksgiving. I didn't go. I was so embarrassed by what had happened. I go home. Now, I was growing up south of Oregon in Northern California. I go back to my home for Thanksgiving, and I tell my brother what had happened, and he's like, "You got to give up on this girl. There's no hope. She's got this other guy. You just made an idiot of yourself. You can't do this." So I decide to sort of totally give up when on the last day of Thanksgiving break, I get a letter in the mail. This is the old days before we had internet and cell phones. If you wanted to write a letter, you usually had to get a piece of slate, and you had to hammer and chisel it. And then you had to get a couple of donkeys, and they'd put it in the saddles, and then they'd ride the donkeys down. That's how we communicated back in the 80s. So, no, it was actually paper, and I got a paper letter, and I open it up, and it has this it says Jill, it has this address. She lived in Oakland, Oregon. And I open it up, and inside is a cartoon. It's a girl, like stick figure, written in pencil, and she's got her elbows on the edge of a balcony, and she's looking down, and there's a guy with a guitar, and he's singing up, and he's singing to her, and on the bottom she wrote, "Don't give up, Jill." And I'm like, yes. That's not what happened. That's not the end. I get this card, and I think this is amazing. So I got two buddies who are going to drive me back to school. We're leaving from California. We're going north. We're going to go through her town, and we're going to go up to school. Well, I call just before we leave. I get her phone number, call her house, and say, "Hey, I got your letter." And she goes, "Oh, gosh, I didn't know if you'd get it or not." "Yeah, I got it." I said, "I can't wait to see you at school tonight." She says, "Actually, I'm not going back." So what do you mean? She said, "My grandparents are here visiting, and I don't have classes for a couple of days, so I'm going to just stay here longer and visit with them." I'm saying, "You're kidding me. I just got your letter. I want to see." "No, I have to stay." So I get in the car. I'm driving with these two buddies of mine. We're going up north, and I start trying to work my magic. I say, "Hey, guys, we're going to be going through this little town of Oakland, Oregon. There's a really neat girl there. I think you'd be really excited to meet her." And they're like, "No way. We are not pulling off for you to see some crush that you just, some girl you just met." I'm like, "Guys, come on, this is serious." They're saying, "No, we're not doing it." So we keep driving. I offer to pay for gas. I offer to buy lunch. They say they won't pull over. We get close to about 10, 15 miles below the town of Oakland, Oregon. We're on the central I-5 freeway, if you know that part of the country. We pull off to get gas. I call her house. She's like, "Hey, are you going to try to stop by?" "I'm trying. I got these two robot friends who are heartless. I think they're robots. I don't think they're real. They won't pull over. They don't care." She says, "Well, my mom says you're going to find a way." I said, "Tell your mom I'm trying, but it's not working with these guys." We get back in the car. I beg these guys one more time. They say, "No, we're not going to pull over so you can see this girl." Now it's about 10 o'clock, 10:15 at night. We go up, and all of a sudden, it starts to snow. And the snow's coming down, first dimes, and then it's like quarters, and it's silver dollars, and there's these big puff balls of snow, and it's thick, and it's coming down in the sky. And we pass, we come up to her exit to Oakland, Oregon, to where she lives. We pass the exit. We go 1 mile, 2 miles. All of a sudden, the freeway is stopped. A truck is jackknifed up ahead, and we're all stuck on the freeway. And so we sit in that car, and I can't believe it. I'm just 2 miles away from the love of my life, 2 miles away from her house, and I'm sitting in a car with two morons. And it's freezing. And we're sitting in there, we're running the engine, then we turn it off, and we sit there 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour. All of a sudden, I go through my bag, and I find that card. It says, "Don't give up." And suddenly, it's just like everything in me says, I got to go find her. So now it's about 11 o'clock at night, and I say to my friends, "You know what? I'm leaving you guys. I'm getting out of the car. I'm going to go find Jill." And you know what they say? They say, "You're an idiot. are you crazy? Stay in the car. It's dangerous out there. You're going to freeze to death. You don't even know where she lives. I said, I have her address. But you're not going to find it. You got to walk through the whole town. How are you going to find her? You got to stay here. You're going to be safe. You're going to be frozen. You could be arrested for walking on the freeway by the highway patrol. Are you out of your mind? And I said, I'm going. I go out. I get my bag. My friend Trevor comes out and tries to stop me. He says, I'm serious. Don't do this. Listen, we'll get up there. You can call her. I said, no, I'm going to try to find her. I hop the little center divider. I go down. I walk the 2 miles down the freeway. I take the freeway exit. I have her address. She lives, the town of Oakland. She lives on Oak Street. I think, no problem. I come off the off-ramp. I go down. It's a little town, 800 people. I go Pine Street. All the streets are named after trees. Elm Street, Walnut Street, Oak Street. Perfect. I walk down. Now we're getting close to midnight. I walk down. I look for the address. It's dark. Just a couple street lamps. I find the house. I can't believe it. I walk up. I go to the door, knock on the door, and the house is dark. As soon as I knock, a dog starts to bark. I hear some rustling inside. Locks are undone. The door swings open, and there is a man standing there in a robe. He does not look happy. Looks like he's been asleep. And he answers the door, and I say, hey, I'm not a weirdo. I go to school with your daughter. I'm not doing anything. Anyways, we go to school together, and I don't know if she's talked about me, but we really like each other. In fact, I'm in love with her. And if you could just have her come to the door, so I just want to say hi, and then I'll stay out here and sleep on the porch. This guy says, you go to school with my daughter. I said, yeah. He said, and you love my daughter. I said, yeah, I do. He said, my daughter's 5 years old. I said, is this the Catton residence? He said, no. I said, oh, I made a mistake. I don't love your daughter. I mean, I know she's very nice, but I don't love her or like her even or know her. And he's like, get in here. The guy brings me into the kitchen. He says, sit down. He goes, what are you trying to do? I said, I'm looking for a girl named Jill Catton. He says, I know Jill Catton. He goes, what street? I said, Oak Street. He said, this is Oak Avenue. We have an Oak Avenue and an Oak Street. I said, well, I'll just go find her. He said, no. Believe me, they do not want to go through what I just went through. I'm going to get the phone. I'm going to call them, tell them you're here. So he calls over there. It's after midnight. About 10 minutes later, Jill's dad pulls up in a car. Jill's in the car. He comes up, he says, hey, are you okay? What are you doing here in town? Where's your car? Are you all right? And I said, yeah, I just wanted to see Jill. And he says, okay, here she is. And Jill looks at me and says, hi. We get in the back of the car. He allows Jill to sit next to me. We drive through the snow. It's now 1 a.m. We show up to the house. And when we get there, her brother's awake. Her sister's awake. Her mother said, I knew you'd make it. She had made applesauce bread and hot chocolate. 27 years later, Jill and I are still together, married ever since that night. That's how I met her family, and that's how we began. The reason I tell that story, the reason I love that story is it's one of the few moments that I was willing to break out of the mold of what everybody else expected of me. My friends are calling me a moron. They're worried that I need to be safe. I know the rules of the freeway are you're not supposed to walk on the freeway. All these expectations, but there was love. I wanted love. I could sense love in the world, and I was willing to go against how my friends felt about me, to risk my own safety, to go out in order to see if there might be love for me in my life. The reason I tell that story is this is what Jesus has come to bring us. Jesus wants you to become fully alive. Now, that's not why most of your parents bring you to a group like this. That's not why they bring you to church. That's not why they want you to be in the church. I know because I'm a parent. They bring you to church because they want you to be safe. And they want you to be nice. And they want you to be around nice people. They want you to learn to be polite. They want you to be good. And those are all fine desires, but it's not what Jesus wants for you. Jesus wants you to be alive. Jesus wants you to have a heart that's porous and transparent. Jesus wants you to love, to receive love, and to be able to give love in this world. And it's so sad because most of us, adults and youth, we're all kind of forced into this very narrow way of living. You know what the pressure is on you. Your parents, the culture, everyone around you wants you to get good grades. Why do they want you to get good grades? So you can get into a good college. Why do they want you to get into a good college? So you can get a good job. You're supposed to get a good job so you can get good money. Why do you need good money? So you can have a good retirement. Why get a good retirement? So you can live when you're 60. That's the game. That's the game you're being played in. And church becomes part of that game. Church, you ever have this experience where you're in the car, you're with your family, and it's tense? There's an argument that's been going on in the house. There's fighting, people are nervous, and you're in the car, and you're on your way to church, and there's this yelling going on, right? I told you not to use that credit card. Well, I didn't know you said that. Well, next time you better tell me. Well, I'm going to walk the bills. You should do the bills next time. I'm sick of doing the bills. Then you pull into the church parking lot, and all of a sudden they step out of the car, and they go, hey, good to see you, Bob. Good morning. It's great to be here. Yeah, beautiful morning. I told you that. You ever say that? And they see somebody else. Hey, God be praised. A beautiful day. Coming to church. And you remember this when you're a little kid and you're growing up and you see this and you think, oh, church is a pretend place. Church is the place where we pretend. Church is not a real place. And what can happen to us in the culture, in the schools, in our families, and even in church is we can think that life, that the faith that we're given is about how we appear. What you look like, what you act like, what you own, what you achieve, what your grades are, all these outer surfaces, that's what life is about, and that's what your worth is. I want to tell you, if that's the kind of Christianity that's being brought to you, leave it. Leave the church. Leave the youth group. It's not real. That's not why Jesus came. Jesus came so you could become fully alive. Alive. Awake. With eyes that know how to see, with ears that know how to hear, with a heart that knows how to love, that you be willing to go and bring your gifts into this world in a way that makes a difference. You know that longing that keeps you awake at night, where you think, I want to get out of here. I want to get out of this town. I want to see the world. I want to make things. I want to have friends. I want to fall in love. I want to experience things. That longing is the presence of God in you. That longing is life. And when you tend it and listen to it, you recognize that what God wants most for you is what you want most for your own life. And that is to love, to be loved, and to be able to give love out into the world. There was a young teacher named Mary Gordon who worked at a school up in Toronto, Canada. And she didn't want to just work at like any old school. She said, send me to a school that's in the toughest place, the roughest areas where kids really need a teacher. So they sent her into a gang area in downtown Toronto, and she got into that school, and she said, it was so hard. They had 35 kids in the 6th grade that she taught, and she said mostly they would get in fights, they would scream at each other, they were cruel to each other, and I spent most of my time just trying to keep people safe. And I could hardly teach a thing. She recognized one day they had a parent helper. And the parent helper came in and she had a baby, a little 6-month-old baby. And when the baby got into the room, it was like the whole classroom softened. Everybody wanted to come over and see the baby. People wanted to hold the baby. She'd put the baby on the floor because it was learning how to crawl. Everybody would get on the floor and watch it crawl. It would try to stand up and fall over. Everybody would go, oh, and see it, and it would cry. Ah! And the kids would go, I know what that feels like. And they would get around this kid. And suddenly, she thought, I'm going to change everything we do in this class. We're going to study babies. And so she told the mother, I want you to bring this baby every day. And the baby would come in, and they would study. She'd say, okay, what's the baby learning, and what's the baby feeling? And everybody was so curious and interested, and they were softened by the presence of this baby. In fact, when the baby would start crying, she would say, have you ever felt like that? And sometimes the kids would start talking, yeah. I haven't seen my dad since I was 2 years old. I know what it feels like to really miss someone, to want to be held. Or I remember riding a bike and I fell over and it hurt. I know what it's like to try to walk and fail. And they started to build community. Well, there was one kid in this class named Daniel. Daniel, at 4 years old, imagine this, 4 years old, he saw his father shoot and kill his mother. His father was put in prison for life, and he was sent from foster home to foster home to foster home. And Daniel, teachers in the faculty room referred to him as the monster. The monster. Because he was always in fights. He was always screaming. He'd shaved half of his head, and he had a cousin of his scrawl a tattoo of a skull on the side of his own skull. And so he looked strange. He looked frightening, and he was just filled with anger and resentment. Well, Daniel was in this class with a baby, and one day he goes to the mother, and he says, "Hey, I noticed that she always goes to sleep around 1 o'clock. Can I help rock her to sleep?" And the mother said, "Sure." So Daniel, this kind of tough kid, puts on the Snuggly, the Snuggly pack it's called, that little front pack, and he puts this baby girl into the front pack, and as soon as he gets that baby in there, he knows what to do. And he starts kind of walking around the room like this. And as he's walking, baby's getting sleepy, if you've seen this. And pretty soon she lays her head on his chest, and he kind of looks around real quietly. "Hey, look." And pretty soon she starts closing her eyes, and he keeps rocking her, and then she falls asleep. And he goes around and he shows everybody that he's been able to hold her and that she's fallen asleep. And then he goes to the teacher and he says this. He says, "Mrs. Gordon, I have a question. Do you think it's possible to be a good parent if you've never been loved?" You see, that boy who was referred to as the monster discovered something. He discovered there's love in me. I have the capacity to care. I'm not just a hoodlum. I'm not just a monster. I'm not just what everybody sees in me. There is love in me, and I know how to care. I know how to show compassion. I could give love. At the same time, in that question, he noticed, I need love. I need someone to care for me. You see, what Daniel had touched into was the very essence of who he was, the very essence of who all of us are. You see, you were made by love. That's what this verse tells us. You were created from love. You were created from God. And whether you live a long life and you die in old age with friends and family surrounded, or whether you die tragic and young, either way, you will return to this same love, that same love that bore you into the world. And you carry the power of God's love within you. And every time you do an act of love, you bring God into the world. You do. You see, the whole world is saying, you're not supposed to live right now. You're supposed to prepare to live. Go to school, stay safe, be nice, and later you'll live. Jesus does not say that. Jesus says, your life starts right now. There are people like Daniel who are in your school. There are people like Daniel who are in your families, in your neighborhoods. And you feel it. You feel their loneliness. You sense the pain and the struggle of their life. And you sense a yearning. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to do it. But you start sensing your own heart wanting to reach out. That's the Spirit of God within you. And Jesus says to you, get out of the car. Don't play it safe. Follow your heart. Use the gifts that I've given you, whether it's to play violin or to build things or to program a computer or to listen well or to be patient. Whatever gifts God has given you, God's saying, use those gifts to be a blessing to others. That's the calling. That's the invitation. That's what this is all about. You know, these adults who come and work here and volunteer here, their hope, you know what their hope is this weekend? Their hope is that you would have a dream. A dream. It may be really simple. You may have a sister who's hurting right now, and you want to find some way to help her. It may be a stranger that you see in your neighborhood that you know needs help at home with their kids. Or it may be a big dream. You may want to put on a whole event. You may want to change something at your school. They're waiting to hear the dream God is dreaming in you. And then go to them and tell them the dream. And they want to help you make it happen. Find the money, find the resources, find the people to make sure that God's dream lives through you. I want to tell you a story of how that happened for my brother. It was right after New Year's, and my brother Trent, he's my younger brother, he calls me, and it's just after the holidays, and he says, Mark, something's happened. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, you know Robert in my band. And now my brother was in a rock band in San Francisco. He still is. And his guitar player is named Robert. And I said, yeah, I know Robert. He says, well, it's a weird thing. He said, I get a phone call while I'm at work, and Robert says, can you meet me at the courthouse? So my brother says, yeah, okay. So he goes down to the courthouse. This is in Northern California in Santa Rosa. He goes down to the courthouse, and there's Robert. He's there with his girlfriend, Amy. And they say, this is during their lunch break, and they say, Trent, we need to get married. So we're getting married here at the courthouse right now, and we need you to be the witness. We have to have a witness legally. We want you to be the witness. And my brother's like, what? What are you talking about? What do you mean you're getting married? They said, well, we're pregnant. We're pregnant, and Robert's dad is an elder in his church and lives back in the Midwest. And Robert and his dad have not spoken to each other in 4 or 5 years. And if he finds out that we got pregnant without being married, there will be no chance of them ever reconciling. And Amy says, I have not spoken to my parents in 2 years. They live down in Los Angeles. And they find out that I'm pregnant out of wedlock, they'll completely reject me. And we'll have no chance of being back together. They were a troubled couple. So we got to get married. And so my brother's like, okay. And they go into the courthouse, and he stands in line there. And he said it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen, because there's people in line, you know, when you're at a courthouse, they're doing all kinds of legal business. They're getting land easements, and they're paying property fees and property taxes. And he's sitting in there, standing in line with these people, and then all of a sudden they come all the way up. And when they get up there, the county clerk has them fill out the papers, pay $25. They raise their right hand, and they're married. My brother signs the sheet. They all go back to work. Robert works at a school. Amy goes and works at a daycare. My brother goes back to a Boys and Girls Club. But my brother said, I couldn't go back to work. He said, I was just thinking, this is sad. This is not the way you should start a family. This is not the way you should start. They feel so ashamed to start a marriage. So Trent said, I called in sick, and I've been driving around all afternoon, and I got an idea, and I want to run it by you. I said, what's the idea? He said, I want to throw a surprise wedding. And this is what I actually said. I'm the older brother. I said, Trent, this is a bad idea. You don't throw surprise weddings. Of course, some of you realize your mothers would love to do that for you. I found just the nicest young man. Here he is. And that's what I said. I said, Trent, you can't do this. You can't do this wedding. I mean, this is complicated stuff. There's a lot of emotions involved. You can't do a surprise wedding. Just throw a party for him and just call it good. My brother says, you know what? I thought you'd say something like that. I'm doing it. He's my younger brother, right? So he and his wife, Andreka, he's in a band, I told you, right? So he's broke. He's got no money. The band guys are going, I know, my pain. I feel it right now. And so he says, first, he's got to find a place to do the wedding. So this is January, and he decides, let's do the wedding in the spring sometime. And he goes to his wife's, to his in-laws' house. They have a little house. It's on the end of a street, a cul-de-sac. Behind their house is a farmland. And Trent thinks, that farm field is perfect. So he goes to the farmer, and he says, can we take down the fence between my in-laws' house and your field? We want to use this field for a wedding. And the guy's like, I don't think so. I got cattle back here. I got all kinds. You can't use the field. My brother says, wait a minute, let me tell you the story. And he tells them about Robert and Amy, how they feel ashamed, how they're alienated from their families. The farmer sits there for a minute, and he says, okay, you can use the field as long as you put the fence back up, and one other condition. I want to come to the wedding. And my brother says, okay, yeah, sure, you can come. So he gets the land, and then they go out in the land and they plant bulbs in January so that they'll come up in the spring, tulips, and they put a little arbor, they plant little rose bushes there, they have lilies, all these kind of things they plant that'll come up in the spring for the wedding. Then he's got to get tables and chairs. He goes to party stores. Nobody will loan it to him. In that part of the country, there's lots of wineries where weddings are held. He goes to a winery. He tells them the story to this one winery, and they say, yeah, we'll give you the tables and chairs, but we want to come. We'll load them ourselves. We'll bring them. We won't have to pay for it. We'll bring them out. He gets that settled. Then he thinks, you know what? We should have this catered. We should have food there so we can have a party afterwards. So he goes to caterers who provide food for these kinds of events. He finds a caterer, and he tells them the whole story, and the caterer's like, I don't know, that's kind of expensive. He says, wait a minute, when are you holding this wedding? My brother says, we don't really have a date. He says, okay, if you hold it in May, first weekend in May, he says, I'm catering a wedding for a very wealthy couple. What I'll do is I'll make extra food, charge it to them, and then give it to you. My brother says, I got no problem with that. Let's do that. And this guy is so kind. He's like, I'll have all my workers go to the wealthy wedding. My wife and I will come. We'll cater your wedding with the food. He said, perfect. He gets a string quartet. He finds this little string quartet because he knows Robert and Amy like that kind of music. And they say, if you do it at 2 o'clock, we'll be in between 2 gigs on that weekend. We'll come over. We'll do it. He gets it all set up, and then he realizes something's missing. And he calls me. He says, Mark, I got all this stuff set up. I'm thinking, that's amazing. He says, but there's one problem. What? He said, the families have to be there. I said, Trent, you don't want to talk to the families. It's complicated. They got all kinds of feelings. Robert hasn't talked to his parents in 5 years. In fact, even though they got married, they still had not spoken to their families. And this is about 2-3 months later. And I said, you don't want to be involved in that mess. There could be fighting. Robert and Amy could see their parents and be really upset. Don't call them. Don't invite them. Trent says, I thought you were going to say something like that. I'm calling him. He's my younger brother, did I mention? So what does Trent do? He calls, the main person they're worried about is the groom's father. So he calls the groom's father, Robert's dad, out in Missouri, and he calls him and says, hey, I know you haven't spoken to your son in 5 years. He said, I need to tell you something. They're so scared. Robert and his girlfriend are pregnant. He got his girlfriend pregnant, and they were so scared how you'd react that they went ahead and got married. And I'm close with both of them. I'm throwing a surprise wedding. I would love it if you would come to it, to bless this wedding. And then Trent said there's a long silence. And the father said, I'll be there. His mother will be there. His siblings will be there. All of the extended family will be there. And if you have any more expenses, call me and I'll pay for it. But yeah, it was amazing. So then he calls Amy's parents, and they say the same thing. We definitely want to be there. Thank you for calling us and telling us, and we'll help you cover any expenses. And so he gets all the families to come. 2 days before the wedding, my brother calls me. And he says, I got everything set up. I got the band. The families are flying in, the whole deal. He says, one problem. So what? He said, I don't have a minister. He said, I need you to do this wedding. Now, I'm a youth worker, and I have an academic degree. I'm not ordained. I'd never done a wedding before. And I told Trent this. I said, I don't know how to do weddings. I've never done one before. I didn't get ordained because I don't like to do weddings. I don't like to be a figurehead, somebody in a ceremony. It doesn't feel real to me. I don't want to do it. And he says, listen, I'll babysit for 2 days in a row if you do it. I said, okay, I'll do it. That's exactly how it went. So I go over to this. I was next to a seminary. I go to the seminary bookstore. I buy a book, How to Do a Wedding. I had to buy a tie because I didn't own a tie. I get the whole thing together, get my jacket, all this kind of stuff. And I'm trying to figure out how to do a wedding ceremony. And the day of the wedding comes, and I start driving an hour north to this house to do this wedding that's going to be a surprise. Meanwhile, my brother somehow Shanghai's 2 motorhomes. I don't know where he got them. They may have been stolen. But he gets them. And they call Robert and Amy, and they say, hey, we want to take you out for a nice lunch. Can you guys dress up? meet us in front of this fancy restaurant in this little town called Tiburon. So those two dress up. They're standing outside waiting for lunch. The two motorhomes pull up. All her friends are in one. His friends are in the other. They run out. They grab him, blindfold him, throw him in one, blindfold her, put her in the other. They drive away. They've all got bags over their head with cutout eyes and drawn, like, so you can't tell who they are when they were blindfolding him. He's like, what's happening to me? Why am I in this? Where are we going? They're saying, be quiet. They drive him out to a field. They take him to an oak tree. They take Robert. They hoist him up into the tree. They unblindfold him, untie his hands, give him a notebook, and they say, write down everything you love about Amy. And he's like, why? Why are you doing this? Why am I in it? And they said, because we're not going to let you out of the tree until you do. They wanted these to be his vows. So they just said, write down everything you love about Amy. I don't know what they did with her, but this is what they did with him. Then they get him in. Meanwhile, I drive up. I pull up to this house. We were all instructed to hide our cars behind a local school. I hide the car. I walk the block and a half. I show up. I open up the little cedar gate that goes to this backyard, and it's amazing. Here's about 120 white chairs. There's tables with candles and wild flowers. They have an oak tree where they're going to do the ceremony, and they have little lanterns, little Chinese lanterns hanging there. There's a string quartet, and it's warming up and playing. There's a table with a man in a tux, and his wife is in a black dress, and they're serving the food, and all these people are there. And then I see these two families. They're all dressed up. You could tell it was the families because they were so dressed up and they weren't speaking to anybody. They were nervous. And I realized, oh my gosh, they want to bless their kids and they don't know how. There's this pain and this absence and they don't know what to do. And so I throw out the How to Do a Wedding book and I write a whole different ceremony so that they can do what they long to do. We get ready, I introduce myself, and all of a sudden the radio call comes in. We're on our way, we'll be there in 2 minutes. All of us get in rows, we all hide down behind the fence. We hear the two motorhomes pull up. Everybody, all the friends jump out of the motorhome. They run around the house, they join us, they're hiding there behind it. Robert and Amy come out, and you can hear my brothers walking with them up to the gate. They can't see over this fence. They can't see us all back there. And they're talking, and Amy's saying, I thought we were going to eat lunch. I'm 6 months pregnant. I need to eat. What are you doing? And they're complaining and all this stuff. And my brother takes them and he walks them up to this gate, to this back of this house. And he swings the gate open. And he steps them both into the backyard. And as soon as they step back there, the wedding march begins to play. And all of us stand and turn and face them. And this poor young couple, they look around and they hear the music and they see all of us and they just begin to collapse. Just all the burden of shame they were feeling, all the weight of what they were carrying begins to fall over them and they just start to cry. Two friends have to come out from the rows and hold them up. And they walk them down the aisle. And it takes them 15 minutes to walk down this little aisle because they would take a few steps and they would look to the side. And there would be a cousin that they hadn't seen in years. And they would go into the aisle and the cousin would hug them and pour tears over them. And then they'd go a couple rows up and they'd see an uncle and they'd go into the aisle or they'd see a coworker. They didn't even see their parents until they got to the front row. And when they got to that front row and they saw their parents, they covered their faces, still feeling ashamed and broken. And the parents came around them and lifted their hands and put hands on them. And then the grandparents came and put hands, and their siblings came, and all of a sudden everyone just broke out of the aisle and began to put hands and started to pray and to cry and to say words of blessing to this little couple that felt so far from everyone, so isolated. And I want to tell you, in that moment, every one of us, every single one of us was blessed. Was blessed. This is the power that God has given us in the church. It's a very simple and natural power, and the power is this: to love. to sit and wait in the pain of others until love finds a way. To allow love, which is God's Spirit, to move through you. To use your imagination and creativity to bring blessings to those people who help. You don't have to tell them about God. You don't have to preach anything. Be the presence of Jesus in the world. Be it by your actions. Find a creative way to show people out there who are like Daniel, who feels unloved, who are like Robert and Amy, who are filled with shame. Find a way through your life, your eyes, your hands, to make Jesus alive in the world. And then you will find that in that work, you become blessed. Amen? Amen. Thank you for your attention.